Welcome in, everyone. It is great to have you with us today for another custom-tailored deep dive.
Really looking forward to this one.
Yeah, we've got a fascinating exploration lined up for you today. And the territory we are mapping isn't geopolitical or macroeconomic. It is entirely internal.
It's quite literally inside your head.
Exactly. We are looking at a widely discussed concept drawn from a variety of historical and psychological research. It's centralized today under the banner of the breakfast table, test mapping, the mind's eye.
Such a great title.
It is. And our mission for this session is to take an interactive mental journey together, to essentially map the landscape of your internal cognitive world.
Which is a highly unique focus for a deep dive, honestly. We spend an enormous amount of time parsing external data sets, analyzing trends, looking at objective facts.
Right.
But this topic turns the analytical lens completely inward. It asks us to examine the fundamental phenomenology of our own thoughts.
How we construct our internal realities. And to set the stage for this, think about a baseline assumption most of us operate under. We tend to assume a shared cognitive landscape.
We do.
We navigate the world taking for granted that the fundamental architecture of human thought is a universal constant, like how a memory feels or how an idea is visualized.
We just assume everyone does it the exact same way we do.
Right. But the data we are digging into today completely dismantles that assumption. The way you process a visual thought might be structurally alien to the person sitting right next to you. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because to truly understand the divergence in our internal realities, we have to trace this concept back to its origins in the late 19th century.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this isn't just a modern psychological curiosity.
Not all.
The foundation for mapping the mind's eye originates with Sir Francis Galton. This was back in 1880.
Right, 1880.
He was a polymath, heavily invested in measurement and statistics, and he initiated what is now considered a truly revolutionary piece of cognitive research.
He designed a survey.
He did. A survey primarily distributed to prominent scientists and thinkers of his day to measure their visual imagination.
Which is such a brilliant starting point.
Mm-hmm.
Galton naturally hypothesized that these brilliant scientific mindspeople who were conceptualizing these complex theories of physics, biology, chemistry.
Great thinkers.
Right. He assumed they would possess incredibly vivid, highly detailed visual imaginations. He assumed their internal workspaces would be vast and bright.
But the results of that 1880 survey defied those expectations entirely.
Completely flipped them on their head.
Many of these eminent scientists reported having absolutely zero visual imagery.
None.
None. When prompted to recall a scene, they didn't see anything. Their mental landscape was entirely devoid of visual representation. And that discovery marked the very first time the condition we now call aphantasia was formally characterized.
Because prior to Galton's work, we simply lacked the framework to even consider that some individuals operate without a functioning mind's eye.
We didn't even have the vocabulary for it.
The audacity of Galton's undertaking in 1880 is what really stands out to me.
Yeah.
We are talking about an era long before functional MRI machines or PET scans.
Oh, absolutely.
There were no neuroimaging tools to measure blood flow to the visual cortex.
They were operating entirely without the biological markers we rely on today. Galton had to invent a statistical approach, relying purely on self-reported data, to map something utterly invisible.
And that introduces a massive philosophical hurdle, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It borders on what philosophers refer to as the problem of other minds.
Yes.
Because you have direct access to your own qualia, your own subjective conscious experience. You know what it feels like when you picture a dog or a sunset.
But trying to empirically measure the internal experience of another person based solely on their verbal descriptions is incredibly fraught.
Language is inherently limited when describing the invisible.
It's a limitation we still grapple with in cognitive science today. We build our shared vocabulary around a consensus of the external world, but creating a reliable taxonomy for an internal space is much trickier.
Like, if you ask two people to rate the brightness of a mental image on a scale of 1 to 10.
One person's 7 might be another person's 3.
Exactly.
Galton was actually heavily criticized at the time for relying on this self-reporting method precisely because it lacked an objective physical anchor.
Yet, despite those early criticisms, modern neuroscience has actually validated Galton's early surveys.
Brain imaging today shows distinct differences in the neural pathways of individuals who report high visual imagery versus those who report none.
So Galton's intuitive leap to use a highly structured, specific prompt rather than just a vague question about imagination actually yielded incredibly reliable data.
He needed a universal constant. He needed an object or a scene that everyone, regardless of their background, had encountered that very day,
To ensure the memory was fresh.
and that the baseline was standardized.
And that structured universal anchor is exactly what brings us to the core of our deep dive today. We aren't going to just analyze Galton's methodology from a distance.
We're going to put it to work.
Right now, I want to turn the focus directly to you, the listener. Wherever you are right now, we invite you to participate in this cognitive exercise.
It's an excellent way to transition from the theoretical data into applied self-analysis. You are acting as both the subject providing the raw data and the researcher evaluating it.
Let's run the test. If you are in a place where it's safe to do so, maybe close your eyes to remove external visual stimuli. I'm going to give you the prompt. Ready? Visualize your breakfast table.
Give your brain a moment to process the retrieval. Just observe whatever cognitive experience you are having right now as you access that specific memory.
Visualize your breakfast table from this morning. Or, if you skip breakfast, picture a dining table you interact with frequently.
And just as a quick side note, for the sake of the experiment, feel free to mentally edit out the stack of unopened mail or the spilled coffee from this morning.
Yeah, we are just focusing on the table itself.
Right.
Now, as you hold that cognitive representation, we need to analyze it using two specific metrics drawn directly from the historical and modern iterations of this test: vividness and color.
The distinction between those two metrics is vital. Vividness refers to the resolution and clarity of the image, while color refers to the saturation and accuracy of the hues.
It's an evaluation of how your brain's visual rendering engine reconstructs stored semantic memory.
Exactly.
Let's guide you through the first metric. Analyze the color of the table in your mind. Is it a vibrant, photorealistic representation?
Can you see the specific warm mahogany tones of the wood? Or the exact pastel blue of the placemat?
Does a piece of fruit on the table appear with the same bright, saturated yellow or red as it does in the physical world?
Or perhaps your mental processing is utilizing a different visual strategy. Is the color muted?
Does the image appear more like a washed-out, sepia-toned photograph?
Where the concept of the color is present, but the sensory experience of it is significantly dimmed.
Now consider the vividness. When you look at the edges of the table in your mind, are they sharp and defined?
Can you zoom in and see the texture of the grain or the reflection of light hitting the surface?
Or is the overall representation hazy, like a blurry, indistinct shape that lacks definitive borders?
To push the metric to its limit, you must also consider the absence of both. Is there no image at all?
Are you simply recalling the factual data, the semantic memory that the table is round, made of wood, and sits by a window, without any accompanying visual phenomena?
In this scenario, you are retrieving the data flawlessly, but your internal monitor is essentially powered down.
Take a few more seconds to truly evaluate what is or isn't happening in your mind's eye. High-definition detail, a shadowy, muted outline, or a completely conceptual, non-visual awareness.
This evaluation is the crucial step. The way your brain handled that specific prompt provides a direct read on your neurological wiring regarding sensory recall.
It places you on a recognized spectrum of human cognitive processing. Here's where it gets really interesting, because the results of the breakfast table test reveal the staggering boundaries of our cognitive variations.
It really does.
It maps a spectrum with two extreme poles that fundamentally alter how an individual interacts with their own memories and thoughts. Let's examine the upper limit first, a condition known as hyperphantasia.
Hyperphantasia is characterized by visual imagery that is extraordinarily detailed. In fact, for individuals on this end of the spectrum, their internal visualizations are so potent that they rival actual physical sight in their intensity and clarity.
It's a level of sensory recall that is difficult to comprehend if you don't possess it. If a person with hyperphantasia takes this test, they aren't merely remembering the table, they are internally hallucinating it with perfect accuracy.
They can mentally walk around the table, observe the way the morning light casts shadows across the grain.
They could probably read the nutritional information on the cereal box sitting there.
Very likely. The visual cortex is activating almost identically to how it would if their eyes were open and receiving physical light data.
And while that sounds like an incredible advantage, like a photographic memory on demand, it presents its own unique cognitive load.
When your internal imagery is indistinguishable from reality, intrusive memories or negative visualizations can be overwhelmingly visceral. It's a very intense way to process the world.
Which brings us to the stark contrast at the other end of the scale. This is the condition Galton stumbled upon with his scientific peers in 1880, aphantasia.
For someone with aphantasia, the mind's eye is essentially a conceptual void.
The visual rendering simply does not occur.
But this is where the nuance is crucial. Aphantasia is not a memory deficit. It is purely a difference in the format of the memory.
Right. An individual with aphantasia knows exactly what their breakfast table looks like.
They can provide a highly detailed verbal description of its dimensions, materials, and location. They just access that information spatially and conceptually rather than visually.
They possess all the source code, but they don't compile it into a graphic interface.
That's a great way to put it. They rely on spatial reasoning or logic networks instead of pictures.
And Galton's finding that many prominent scientists had aphantasia actually makes a lot of sense when you consider that abstract, non-visual thinking might be highly advantageous for dealing with complex mathematics or theoretical physics.
Areas where literal mental images might actually be restrictive.
Exactly.
What's fascinating here is that based on how you just rated the vividness and color of your breakfast table, you, the listener, currently exist somewhere perfectly unique on this sliding scale between aphantasia and hyperphantasia.
The vast majority of the population falls somewhere in the middle, a state called phantasia, where images are present, but perhaps not perfectly photorealistic.
You might be realizing for the very first time that your hazy, muted mental images aren't the universal standard.
Or you might be discovering that the completely dark conceptual space in your mind is actually shared by millions of other people.
Including some of history's greatest thinkers.
It forces a massive recalibration of how we understand communication. Think about how often we use phrases like, picture this, or imagine the scene.
We issue these verbal commands, assuming the recipient's brain will execute the exact same software we use.
When in reality, their neurological hardware might process that command in a fundamentally different language.
It really does reframe our interactions.
To pull everything together today, we started by tracing the 1880 origins of mapping the mind's eye with Sir Francis Galton.
We explored the deep philosophical complexities of measuring subjective internal qualia using self-reported data.
And then we transitioned from the history into the immediate present, applying the breakfast table test directly to your own cognitive landscape.
You evaluated your own neurological metrics for vividness and color, determining how your specific brain reconstructs semantic memory into sensory experience.
And through that process, we mapped the spectrum of human visualization, from the conceptual framework of aphantasia to the reality-rivaling intensity of hyperphantasia.
We demonstrated that even when we are looking at the exact same physical world, the way we represent it internally is wildly diverse.
So what does this all mean? When we distill this analysis down, what is the practical application of understanding this spectrum?
The practical application is a profound upgrade to our cognitive empathy. Realizing that the foundational architecture of thought varies so drastically from person to person makes us much more effective patient communicators.
It reminds us that our personal phenomenology, the way we experience our own mind, is just one specific iteration of human consciousness.
Not the default baseline for everyone we interact with.
It is a brilliant reminder of the invisible diversity existing right behind the eyes of everyone you meet.
It absolutely is. And as we conclude our deep dive into this topic, this raises an important question, a final thought for you to carry forward. We spent this session applying the spectrum of visual imagery to a mundane object, a breakfast table. But consider the emotional and psychological weight of sensory memory. If we all exist at completely unique points on this cognitive spectrum, how might your specific neurological wiring affect not just how you visualize a piece of furniture, but how vividly you are able to recall the faces of the people you love sitting across from you at that very table?
That is a deeply compelling thought to end on. The realization that our place on this spectrum influences not just our abstract imagination, but the very texture of our most cherished personal memories. Thank you, the listener, for joining us on this exploration today. We appreciate you sharing your time, and even more, for turning the lens inward and sharing your mind's eye with us. Until next time, keep examining the fascinating landscape of your own internal world.